and let me know when to start.
Yeah. So we have.
We will get started momentarily. Are we good to start?
Yeah, people will just come in as we're kind of beginning.
All right.
You begin.
All right, thank you. All right, well, welcome to this expert panel webinar hosted by the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, known as CILT. CILT's mission is to develop the art and science of logistics and transport through education and the sharing of ideas across the 40 countries they have branches at. My name is Marco Ayala. I'm the president of the InfraGard Houston Members Alliance. InfraGard is a partnership between the Federal Bureau of Investigation and members of the private sector for the protection of U.S. critical infrastructure, and I will be your moderator today. We have quite a lineup. So today's expert panel will focus on port cybersecurity, delving into risks to port operations and mitigation strategies and best practices to address cyber threats. This event is being recorded and will be available for viewing on CILTNA's, that's their North American YouTube channel, and the link will be emailed to everyone who registered. Please submit questions for the panel using the chat function, and we will cover as many as possible at the very end of the session, and we'll try to get to every one of those. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, which I'm very humbled and honored to be here with. So our first panelist is Lisbeth. Laurie is an expert in maritime and port security with over 20 years of experience. She currently serves as program manager for the Maritime and Port Security Program at the Inter-American Committee Against Terrorism, known as CICTE, of the Organization of American States, also known as OAS. So Lisbeth has led key initiatives across the Americas, including development of maritime security strategies for Guatemala, Eastern Caribbean countries, and regional maritime cybersecurity guidelines. She has represented the OAS at numerous national and regional security forums and holds degrees and certifications in public accounting, forensic accounting, and various maritime security disciplines. Fluent in English and both Spanish, she brings a wealth of knowledge in enhancing maritime and port security. Lisbeth, thank you for being here. Our next panelist is Ryan Manning, who is the Director of Security for Port of Long Beach, California, where he oversees a team of over 100 professionals ensuring the safety and security of one of the busiest ports in the United States, handling over 200 billion in goods annually. Prior to his role, Ryan served 30 years in the United States Coast Guard, including as Captain of the Port, or COTP, for the Port of Long Beach in Los Angeles area, and Commanding Officer of the U.S. Coast Guard Activities Europe. He holds multiple advanced degrees in engineering and strategic planning and is a licensed professional engineer in California, which is a pretty amazing feat. So Ryan, thank you also for being here and part of our panel. And our final panelist is Greg Villano, who I've known for many years. Greg brings over 3 decades of experience in industrial automation and control systems with expertise spanning across North and South America. Greg has held various electrical maintenance management roles in industries such as maritime, manufacturing, and notably, he spent 14 years as a licensed commercial mariner and chief electrician for a global offshore drilling company where he pioneered a leading industrial control systems cybersecurity program for their fleet. So such a great opportunity here. So Greg, thank you also for being here with us. So the audience, really excited to have this group here, and hopefully you can see all of them present. So we're going to open up a question, and Elizabeth, I'd really like to get your input on this. And again, please, folks, put questions into the chat function. Do you see the digitalization of maritime sector as an opportunity? Or Elizabeth, do you see it as a challenge? You're on mute, by the way.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for the invite, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today and share my experience. Oh, Mark, before I start, I just want to clarify. Today, I'm here representing the Center for Ocean Policies and Economics.
Okay.
So I just want to clarify that. Okay, so straight to the question. I think the digitalization of the maritime sector brings both. It brings opportunities, but also brings challenges, right? And to illustrate this point, let me consider a port facility as an example. So over the past few years, the demand of products has grown in a greater pace compared to the capacity of port facilities. And as a result, port facilities needed to adapt their process to become more efficient and more effective. And these changes may involve the development of smart ports, the implementation of single windows, the integration of new technologies such as smart containers, automated cranes, Internet of Things, and many more that I know everyone here is very familiar with these new technologies, which is great because it enhances the ability to compete in the market. However, these new technologies, it also increased vulnerabilities to cyber attacks. As we all know, traditionally, information technology and operation technology systems, they used to stand alone. But as the sector evolve, these two systems become integrated, meaning that they are both now exposed to cyber attacks.
Yeah.
With
that's-
the so with the digitalization of the IT, systems are more exposed. We all remember that most of these transactions manifest, they used to be manual, and somehow, I mean, this information, it was not in one computer, but it was in one place. But now it's more exposed, especially when we have the single window, and all this information is basically in the cloud. And also we see that the OT, which are now increasingly connected to network through the Internet of Things, they're also a greater risk. And with this, I'm not saying that it's just affecting the maritime sector. No, it's part of the evolution. It's affecting every single sector. And actually, if we see it, I mean, it's affecting our life because currently we are in a world that is increasingly connected to a device, to a network, to an internet. Every day, everyone, we use cell phones, we use computers, we use printer. Actually, I mean, now you can, I mean, before you have to go to a printer and have a cable. No, you can print something from your cell phone. We have platforms, we have applications, we have WhatsApp that we use every day. We use Netflix that we use, sit down every time that we come back from work, relax and use Netflix. We use maps on our phones to go to one place to another one. We use the weather to see what are we going to wear. So basically, we are constantly interacting with these applications, with internet, with network, with other people. And we just need to be aware. And we need to take proper measurements to make sure we are secure, because what you do every day on your cell phone or every day, just on your everyday life, like I mentioned before, it seems to be insulated, but at the end of the day, it impacts others and it impacts everybody, and it can disrupt people around you. So basically, well, it's part of life. It's everything new, and everything new brings opportunity, but also brings challenges. And I think the key here is just to be proactive and to overcome these challenges by being proactive and just be prepared.
That's a great input, Lisbeth. So I think one of the key things there that I was able to get out of that is the high confidence in interconnectivity that we didn't see 20 years ago into the maritime industry. So, Greg, I wanted to get your input because obviously you've been assessing systems and also helping with design and deployment strategies for the ports of the futures, but really for the port of today as well. What is your thought? Do you see it as an opportunity, or do we still see this as much more of a challenge with all the threats that we face today?
Yes, I would definitely agree with Liz. Huge opportunities. One of my mottos over all these years working in the industry was, work smarter, not harder.
Right.
If there was a way to simplify tasks, manual tasks into an electronic format, if you will, then we would definitely leverage those. So again, great opportunities. I guess the challenging piece, as Liz also mentioned, just doing it in a secure fashion. 10, 20 years ago, we never worried about securing any of those systems or protecting those systems. So again, as we've become more electronic and data driven, that security piece has to come in. And again, it's become a struggle and a challenge to maintain the security or increase security around, especially older systems.
It definitely has, especially around I wouldn't say completely blind reliance on digitization and digital hardware and software. But Ryan, what are your thoughts on that? Do you see this opportunity? And obviously, this is a challenge. But given your broad background from officer to captain of the port to where you're at today, what are your thoughts?
So, like my esteemed panelists that are much more cyber experts than I would ever consider myself, as you mentioned, I'd been involved in a lot of the policy and regulatory governance piece of it. But I think absolutely both a opportunity and a challenge. I think we always, like you said, look back 20 years and what was the cargo throughput at any one of these facilities throughout the entire world, and certainly digitization has been probably the largest factor in increasing that cargo throughput. Besides the fact of our voracious appetite for using and throwing away things, and so
Right.
yeah, definitely an opportunity, but a challenge. And as I was wearing my former hat as a regulator, it was one of those where we were really almost relying upon the maritime industry to manage that risk because the regulatory scheme just can't catch up and stay current with the pace of digitization. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if it does take a lead, it's usually very prescriptive, as we saw with the TSA and the pipeline industry. And there was a lot of pushback from industry and industry organizations from the safety impacts and the possible domino effect. And that domino effect in the port side and maritime side could have huge impacts to not just our nation, but the countries around the world. So staying with you on point with the question, how does the digitalization affect the maritime sector, and how has this impacted security?
So as I was wearing the Coast Guard hat and I was in our Office of Port and Facility Compliance and kind of running the policy direction for how we were managing cyber in the marine transportation system, we looked at this as it's a crawl, walk, run process, and with that, it starts with training and education of folks and awareness of that. The second piece of it was kind of governance and relying upon that, and then the third one would be kind of standards and regulatory development, and wanting to keep it in that type of a framework. To not get into, like you had just mentioned, prescriptive regulatory scheme thrown at us. Paul Thomas was the Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy about 10 years ago, and really kind of the lead of when we started talking about cyber and the MTS. And he used to call out a couple of, I would call, predictable tragedies in the maritime world that has really, from a regulatory burden, cost the world a lot of money, and those two are the Exxon Valdez grounding, which came with the Oil Pollution Act in 1990 and double hull requirements, and the second one was the Maritime Transportation Security Act. I think if you look at the regulatory burden from a cost perspective, it's probably the majority of what facilities are and maritime operators having to spend is tied to those predictable tragedies the thing that we'd like to stay away from is having a cyber tragedy where, we actually, and I understand we've got a kind of pretty worldwide audience here, but within the U.S., definitely a potential for prescriptive regulation to come down from Washington D.C. pretty quickly. I think we've had that. We've kept a pretty upward tick in additional requirements, but I think it's been at a predictable pace and not ahead of where the industry's been governing the cyber risk itself.
And we do currently have an NPRM that's sitting up in Washington right now, where they can feedback from some new security possible regulations. We'll definitely have to see if there's a new administration, how much further that goes, and also with the latest ruling on the Chevron doctrine, we'll know more as time comes by. So, Lisbeth, I wanted to get your input as well. So, how has digitization affected the maritime, and how has this impacted security?
Okay.
Are you there, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I was just trying to.
Okay.
Yeah, can you repeat your question, please?
Sure. Yeah. How has digitization affected the maritime sector, and how has this impacted security what is your thoughts?
Yeah. So I think it's when a cyber intrusion, right, or a cyber attack impacts the maritime sector, it brings consequence, correct? So I think this is a very relevant question, because anything that is undetected in the maritime sector can have a high impact and consequence, especially because the maritime sector is a critical infrastructure. So any disruption can produce devastating consequences, including operational disruptions, financial loss, bad reputation, geopolitical problems, threats to human life, national security, environment. I mean, a lot of consequence, and also can also generate an impact in the economy. So, and we also have to take into consideration that the maritime sector and maritime industry is part of the global supply chain. So any disruption can cause a long-lasting damage to both to the sector and to the international trade. So, for example, when we talk about cyber attackers that target the critical port system, let's say the terminal operating system, or cargo handling, or vessel trafficking management system. This can cause delays in loading and unloading cargo, also lead to port congestions or any disruption in the supply chain as well. Or we can also talk about when attack affect the ship navigation system, the GPS and the IS. This can let the attacker to be able to manipulate these vessels, to reroute them, to ground them, to lose them. And this could result in a collision or environmental damage or loss. And I just keep going on and on and on. But before, I mean, since we're talking about supply chain and how this affect, I mean, another example is also when there's a disruption in the port operation, the container management system, or the shipping route. No, I mean, this can cause a widespread supply chain bottleneck. So critical goods like food, medical supplies, energy, resources, everything will be affected, everything will be late, and it can affect us. And if I had time, I can continue going on, but
Well, I think it's
don't know
great.
how
When we come into the impacts and consequences, especially with this digital spectrum of communications, and whether it's direct or even indirect, this reliance on technology, you take any one aspect on, whether it's AIS or GPS, or even just the scheduling system that you use, if it's manipulated or tampered with or provides false information, that could have huge repercussions. So great points on that, Elizabeth. Very much.
no, and you know what? Something else is like, unfortunately, this is happening so much in our sector, and it's the ransomware attack.
Oh,
So
yes.
as we know, I mean, any infiltration in the system, every encryption of information or holding
There are currently reports
hostage.
right now. Yeah, there's
Yeah,
currently
it can
reports
delay
right now.
yeah, it can delay it for weeks, for days until this is paid, and it's just going on and on. It's I mean, like I say, digitalization is great. I'm happy. I mean, everybody's happy with the way that the world is moving, but we just need to be aware. And I think this is one of the reasons this webinar that we're having right now is it can help create this awareness and
Right.
help how to take the measures to be in a better place.
I'm going to jump over to Ryan. You know, Ryan, these impacts and consequences, I guess from a response standpoint, how are you seeing industry respond to these threats, whether it be business email compromise or phishing that could have impacts into operations or just downtime? Just, you know, what are you seeing?
Certainly. Let me kind of bring back some of the kind of that, the effects of digitization and how it's really helped, but just a real easy example to kind of lay out. The 2017 NotPetya attack on Maersk that affected, the 5 different terminals throughout the U.S. I'm sure terminals throughout the entire world were affected, but when they had to basically go back to, hey, we can still do cargo ops, but cargo ops are much slower. And so you think about the throughput of what the terminals are pushing through now. It's really tremendous that they can even use the pen and paper model, so to speak. But from a response perspective, it certainly is one of those where by the time that we've actually identified that there's something maybe inside the system, it's probably been there for a while. If you look at historical data on that, and who knows how much has already been done by the time that's actually determined that someone's been intruded into your system. So I think it's another risk to manage. And then I think part of that is the resilience piece that people build into their plans, because they kind of are kind of betting on something to occur, whether it be human-induced slowdown or something that's coming from the outside source. So I think it's about having resilience and being able to continue your operations. Well, maybe not at 100%, but at least to be able to, know where to turn to, have a backup, these kind of things in place to be able to continue your operations.
I guess definitely help define your own port risk register, right? And risk tolerance and risk acceptance to some level and getting visibility into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, as, within the U.S. port network, we're here at the Port of Long Beach. We're a landlord port. So really all of these terminal operators are all kind of like their own islands and managing the risk there only at the terminals. Throughout the U.S., I'd say there's about a third that are landlord type ports, about a third that are operating ports that actually are operating their own terminals, and then about a third that are kind of a mixed use piece of that. So from that perspective, we're relying upon all of our tenants to be doing the right thing and understanding that obviously the federal government is going to have whatever regulatory scheme they need to ensure that risk is bought down. But from the port perspective, obviously we want things to flow efficiently. We want things to flow, so that the cargo continues, come on in and we can get it out of the port and out to the shelves and throughout the United States.
Hugely important, vastly important, and critical to our well-being, especially when a lot of these ships are coming in from foreign areas, and they don't have or intend to bring in anything malicious. But I remember one captain of the port would consider a floating vessel just another possible portable media stick, coming into either an LNG facility to be offloaded or onloaded, or a vessel coming in, with their transactions needing to be, push-pull from a portable media stick, which obviously can have its own issues and be that vector in that no security practice external, your IT environment may not even be able to capture that. So great points. Greg, with this increased level of security and events that have been impacting maritime, and we know it's not going to stop, and we've seen this trend only uptick. The quantity of breaches has only been going up. So how have you seen, from your perspective, owner operators reacting to the reports and the security impacts? How are you seeing it?
Yeah, certainly. It's interesting because it's a varying degree of what I would call readiness.
Okay.
Some owner operators that have embraced being proactive in a cyber approach are obviously looking for things, monitoring things that they hadn't in the past. So I guess that there's some ports or companies that seem very well prepared. They test. They drill, they work it into their drills, including, as a cyber incident as part of like a tabletop exercise and things like that. And then of course the opposite end of the spectrum, some smaller companies that are just trying to grasp where to start. If something impacts them, they may not even have the knowledge that they're being impacted immediately. It could be days or weeks.
Yeah.
And so there's that reactive piece, I think is still out there, unfortunately. But yeah, just a widespread from very well prepared to not very well prepared, I guess it would be the easiest way to put it.
Yeah. So while I got you, obviously we've talked about, the scenarios and the different threats, but from a recommendations and best practices point of view, for these owner operators or even these port tenants that are struggling with addressing cybersecurity for both the IT, the enterprise side, but also the operational side, whether it's cranes, power, switchgear, that are really more, I guess, even more smart technologies that are being deployed now to where, as Elizabeth was saying, you might be able to communicate with it from your mobile app to look at its health, but you may have capability to isolate those in. So for those that are struggling, can you recommend helpful ideas for them?
Yeah, absolutely. 10 years ago, when I was working for that offshore drilling company, and was tasked with creating a program specifically for industrial control systems, had no idea where to start, nowhere to, didn't have any idea who I could start asking questions of. So I think over the last 10 years, the more focus on cybersecurity, especially, that there's some fantastic resources out there. If you don't know where to start, I think the first place would be find a colleague that may be in a similar company, a similar vertical.
Right.
And you can just start asking questions. Invite them to lunch one day and just say, what are you doing? How are you doing it? Have you done things that work great? That were easy, quick wins, if you will. The low hanging fruit problems that can be resolved. And ask them point blank, have you tried things that didn't work? Were the things that you thought looked good in a PowerPoint from a vendor? You spent time deploying it and configuring it, and it didn't do what it said it was going to do.
Right.
But yeah, I would start with colleagues in similar verticals, and even outside of those verticals. Just kind of look around at what other industries are doing or how they've addressed it. The InfraGard is a great example. Joining some of the local communities, cyber communities that share information safely and securely about each other. Work with them again. Just I think growing that list of contacts and cohort of similar-minded people that are trying to solve the same problems as you are is a fantastic approach.
Absolutely. I did want to ask Lisbeth on best practices and recommendations. I guess from an America's perspective for COPE, what are your thoughts on addressing cybersecurity from a recommendation and best practices perspective? What are your thoughts?
Yes. Well, From my perspective, I see that over the years, we have focused on the physical security of port facilities, right? Implementation of ISPS codes, 20 years. I mean, we've been doing it for 20 years, different regulations, law, among others, right? And we have done an excellent job. However, I feel, or from my perspective, I feel that we have ignored or maybe not paying too much attention to the cybersecurity part. So my recommendation would be to address maritime and port security in a holistic way, since maritime infrastructure includes both, includes physical assets and also cyber access. And as we evolve, these cyber assets are going to play a bigger role within the port facility and the maritime sector. So that will be my first recommendation. And also another recommendation would be that I think that it's important to establish a culture about cybersecurity, that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. It's not just the IT as it used to be a previous year, right? But if we are going to make ourselves and our co-workers and team responsible for cybersecurity, then it's also important to know what are we protecting, right? And so training and capacity building is basic. That's something that needs to be done. But also, I think it's very important to understand the maritime ecosystem, how these different stakeholders interact with each other, and know that if one of these stakeholders is compromised, it will create a domino effect. So understand the whole big picture. So training, understand the whole picture, and then go a little bit more narrow. And if we are in the maritime sector, if we are in a port facility, also understand how the port facility operates and understand the importance of the IT and the OT system and how they connect to a network and how they interact with each other. How the utilization of Internet of Things are making these two systems becoming integrated, and also understand everything that is around. Understand, like, just be conscious of how like a printer connects to a computer, how different systems, how the different devices or equipment under the OT system operates, and what will be the effect if this gets compromised. So big picture, port,
Holistic
and
view.
then and
Right.
then something that I think is also very important is, because like I say, it's just knowing and be asked all these questions all the time, how this interacts and how this can be compromised, but also understand the outside, right? Who are those potential actors? What are the motive? Are they criminals, activists, competitors? They want to spy, and why we are an important target. I mean, like, especially port facilities. I mean, we are critical infrastructure, so this is a big, a very important target for organized crime. And the last, understand the type of cyber attack, malware, phishing, social engineering, this is going to be part of the training. But just, I mean, just understand the whole thing. And the basic recommendations, as always, complies with rules and regulation, which is something that, I mean, we have been doing. Create cybersecurity management, crisis management, resilience, good practice, all these things that we know. But I just want to highlight those two that I mentioned in
I
the
think
beginning.
that's great, Lisbeth. I really think that's a great approach. And I did want to ask Ryan as well. Do you see better and stronger collaboration for recommendations and best practices across, say, Coast Guard and IMO from a global perspective specific to cybersecurity? I know they put out some MSCs, but I always had seen somewhat of a disconnect. Do you see that getting better and stronger in this global economy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that community of interest is definitely, to Greg's point, building that network of contacts within that's just growing. And I think the better that everyone can do, the more the better they're going to be off in the managing this cyber risk. You mentioned that the Coast Guard had published the notice of proposed rulemaking, back in February, and the comments have all been received. There's about 100+ comments on it, but a lot of those talk to, and back to kind of Greg's point, there's varying degrees of maturity in the way that folks have been managing cyber. And I think it's really difficult for any regulatory scheme to be able to kind of be laid out and applied to an industry that does have those varying degrees of maturity. CISSA also published that NPRM, the CIRCIA, really about doing notifications, and certainly in our discussions with them, they while they are the cybersecurity infrastructure security agency, they recognize that Maritime, for instance, is going to instantly pick up the phone and call the Coast Guard. The airline industry, is going to go to the FAA. So it's one of those where it's like all of the sectors, transportation sectors have their own kind of belly button that they'd be reaching back to. And so I think that's natural for those organizations to do that. And I think for CISSA to come in and try to, establish some type of reporting network, it's really going to be kind of a balancing act that they got to, juggle with the other regulatory bodies that govern those sectors. So.
Absolutely. I do feel the pain also across all the different federal regulatories that may have needs, but the NRC, like you were mentioning, like the reporting center or response center, will take that call and then coordinate with the other folks. So, but one of the things around maturity, because you mentioned it a few times, just in here in passing, is for the folks that already have a really good, mature physical and cybersecurity program, how do they get better? I mean, because it's always, what can you do this year, but what can you do to increase that maturity?
Yeah, that is definitely one of those where, and I am certain that any of those industry leaders that are, have very mature systems are not going to stop, because they understand that this is a journey that we're on, not a destination. And so I think it's one of those where if you think and you kind of step back and say, okay, we're good to go, that's when you're going to get whacked. And so I think the probably the more important is to kind of, we've got some folks up here that are just top notch and managing risk because they've got budgets and C-suites that know that that's important. But then you've got a sector of the industry that is down here that's, operating at bare minimum. And we really need to bring those folks up so that we can, minimize that risk, because in the end, the entire marine transportation system caters to both the folks that are up here and down here. The system is only as strong as its weakest link. So I think that's the piece of it where the Coast Guard and CISSA are really hoping to be able to increase the maturity of cyber risk programs that the folks have. So
is the funding requirements being realized across other port operators that may not be as mature, say, as other ports? I mean, is it something that's been realistic across the board to be able to see, increased needs, but also deployment of technology for security enforcement?
Yeah, so in reading the comments to the Coast Guard for those that notice of proposed rulemaking, I know there definitely was a lot of discussion about, this is great, we need to do this, but where is the funding coming from? And I know that FEMA in their port security grant program has really emphasized cyber as one of the emphasized programs that they'd like to provide port security grants to. So I think that's certainly a potential, but again, it's got to start somewhere, and that usually ends up being somebody in the C-suite that says we need to make this a priority. And when they're figuring out their budgets, this is how much we're going to need to spend in order to buy down that risk.
I think that's great, Greg. This is something I know that's probably pretty near and dear to your heart too. Is how do you bring into a port or an operator or even a maritime vessel owner that has a fleet that is starting out and needs funding, but how do we get them to mature in their program? Is from your side, what are your thoughts? What does it
Yeah,
take?
I've seen two approaches that have been very successful. One being, align cybersecurity to safety.
Love
Wrap it
that.
into that safety umbrella. C-suites understand the importance of safety, the impacts of safety. So if you can, tail the cybersecurity and protection of systems and monitoring of systems into the security aspect for the C-suite, that makes them understand very well and usually fairly quickly. Another approach is, again, just depending on industry, but if you have a client that you're working for, and that client has requirements that they push to you that says, if you want to do business with us, using the drilling industry as an example, if you want to drill wells and hunt for oil for us, then you need to have, as a minimum, these cybersecurity, policies, procedures in place, response plans in place, and things like that. So if it's pushed from the client, to the subcontractor, if you will. Again, if you want to do business with that larger oil major, then, and they're telling you need to have something in place, then that's been a pretty quick funding sort, a funding reason, if you will, of, okay, hey, we don't have anything in place. We need to, let's get started on this and show progress and, start addressing it ASAP, or we're going to lose money or not earn any money. So
I have seen assessments that look at loss of cargo or movements with cranes, with the STS, the ship to shore. These are all just digital platforms now and have interconnectivity. So those need to be, I guess, assessed. Is that something that you help tie into the safety, the loss of human life, or impact to environment in case a container goes overboard, let's say, and has an environmental impact to, say, California, that could have huge repercussions?
yeah, definitely. I mean, you take a look at all those risks, and that cyber risk should be threaded right into your risk matrix.
Okay.
For your company.
We have had, I mean, obviously early warning indicators from the ransomware stuff that haven't had direct operational technology impacts, but it's not to say that if we don't do our due diligence, it couldn't happen. We have to look at these things from a low frequency, high consequence perspective, definitely going into it. So, I think it's really important to really tie that into safety. So that's really, really imperative. Lisbeth, to overcome the challenges that we are facing today, could you provide one or two other recommendations or some strategies that you've seen work?
Sure. Yeah, I think I mean, besides that, the ones that I mentioned, I mean, something that we had done and at the OS that I was leading is the development of national maritime security strategies.
Mhm.
And I think this is a very good tool because it gives you the opportunity to identify all the threats related to the maritime sector, but at the national level. And something that is good about this is that we were able to put together 17 institutions when we did the one for Guatemala, 17 institutions in one room trying to identify what are the threats, and we did a whole risk analysis about it. So threats like the possibility of happening, the mitigations tools that we have in place. So a whole risk analysis, and of course, one of the threats that show and is cybersecurity. So that will be my recommendation is just to do. I mean, of course, a maritime security strategy will be my first recommendation, but also, if not, at least a national risk assessment of the threats related to cybersecurity.
Oh, that's great. I'd like to really get into the leadership perspective, and especially when it comes to top down and buy-in and responsibility. And Greg, I'd like to start with you, and then go over to Ryan. But how can we help the C-suite or the executives better understand the importance and value of investing in a proactive rather than that firefighting reactive high cost of repair and remediate cybersecurity type program?
Great question. I mean, that safety piece for me trumps everything. So once they have that understanding,
Yeah.
but as far as to convince, I guess to work to that proactive approach, if you look at some of the historic events in the last 5 to 10 years, even around, cyber impact, and just the impact that it has on a company's reputation, as they have an event occur and it has to be, publicized, the overall impact on their business, on that particular business. So, I mean, that from a proactive view, I think every C-suite's worst nightmare would be negative,
Right.
negative to be viewed negatively in the news. So, just protection of brand.
Protection of brand, property, people, all of that.
Yeah.
So,
And again,
I
health,
didn't mean to put
safety,
you on
and
the spot, but
environment for me.
it's an important one because we do still feel like there is a lagging in security spend, but I do see that getting better. So let me roll over to Ryan. Add on to that question for how to get the executives a little bit more buy-in to actually help out with funding, or whether that's able to get funding from your local government through through Coast Guard or FEMA or whoever it may be. But add on to that, what is the role of port authorities and our federal agencies in the discussion of managing risk, and how can you tie that into funding? Get your input.
I kind of touched on, FEMA's got their port security grant program. California actually just has recently established a cybersecurity grant program that, they've got some money that, at least to help people get started. And again, a lot of this comes down to, and Greg hit it. I mean, the folks that are mature, the folks that are already understand and get it, that we've got to invest because it is going to be a huge hit to the brand or the organization when their name is the headlines across whatever web page we're looking at, since it's not the newspaper anymore. But certainly reputational risk, I think, is enough for most large organizations to know. And in fact, they're leaning probably even further to the side of trying to buy down themselves to zero risk, because they know they can't afford to have that happen to them. From a government perspective, it's about communication and kind of becoming partners with the industry in which you regulate. And so I think, when I was wearing the Coast Guard blue, it was always about kind of trying to understand what is that industry that I'm been tasked with to regulate. What is their major challenges? What does their operations look like? That way, in a sense, it helps, and helped me become that kind of common sense regulator, rather than one that's just looking at it from a black and white perspective, and recognizing that, there are varying degrees of maturity in organizations. And certainly I know if there was one thing that I understood, and that was that, the folks in the C-suite don't want to be that the next example that's made for everybody to talk about what cybersecurity is not good with. So
No, that's good input. So before we move on to our Q&A section, I did have one closing one because I think this is an important aspect of it. Lisbeth did touch on culture, and no amount of awareness and training can help you with culture, because culture definitely plays the biggest part, if not the capstone, on any program. So with the human element being a major factor in this, how important is the human element in managing cybersecurity? And Elizabeth, I want to start with you to get your input there.
You were muted.
You're on mute.
I have a dog, so I have to mute my phone. Last time he attacked me when I was in a meeting, so Okay, so that's why I keep, I'm really sorry about that.
It's okay.
Human elements in managing cybersecurity. I think the human elements are, the people are the assets of any sector or any organization, but they can also be the weakest link in any system because they can introduce threats, risks, and into the work environment. As I mean, we discussing before how we are interacting every day with different devices. I think they're key. I think they're the weakest link, and to manage cybersecurity, I think it's important to have the proper capacity building and training, and like as I mentioned before, be aware of what is around and understand how our sector works and how and the role or the important role that they play to I mean as they play to save or secure the system of the sector.
Greg, from a culture perspective, because you've seen it offshore and onshore at port facilities, what can folks do and how important is that human element?
Yes, yeah, it's no longer, gates, guards, and guns. It
And
becomes
dogs.
the responsibility of everybody, because this cyber piece are things you can't see or smell or touch until they've really gone wrong. So yeah, I mean, everybody's responsibility. Just
Yeah.
teaching people. I mean, good people make mistakes. From a scan of a system that should never have been scanned, shutting an entire facility down. Again, not intentionally, but just by accident. So the cyber piece, I think needs to be viewed not only from an external threat, but also just good people making bad choices.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Ryan, what are your thoughts on how important it is from a human element perspective in managing your cybersecurity risk as a port operator?
Yeah. So, to kind of to Greg's point, good people making bad decisions. And I think that it's about culture, and it's going to take a while. I would speak broadly for the panelists here and you, Marco, that we grew up in a generation where we didn't start with one of these in our hands like our children, started from the beginning. And so I think culturally, until that's like ingrained in everybody to understand the importance of it, it will take a long time to get there. One of the examples that I'd say is, one of our district commanders was kind of likening some, risks that we accept. And that is, so let's say one of your boarding teams came back from, a patrol and they didn't have their weapon with them. Like, we would probably be pretty freaked out about that. Where did it go? Where's it? Whereas that person good person that made the bad decision to click on that phishing link or otherwise, what did we do to that person? I think we judge the things that we know and and maybe don't have such harsh consequences on folks that are not, and let's just be realistic. People should know by now that you're not going to click on those links, that you're going to get the free cruise to Jamaica.
Right. Right.
But the fact is that they continue to do it. And so training will be one way that we can try to shape that culture and make sure people understand, hey, this is real. And then I think also having some consequences to, making those mistakes. Certainly, if nobody's going to get hurt, there's no reason to be real harsh about it. But people have got to understand and learn that, this is a new way that we're going to be working. And so let's keep ourselves secure in the way that we act.
Oh, that's great stuff, great input. So we're going to go ahead and move to the questions. We do have to be really considerate in time with our responses. We've actually got probably about 6 minutes left before the top of the hour. But I would like to start in the order that they came in, because I think it's important to get those that started with the chat. So one of the audience members asked, what are the main sources of cybercrime in the ports? And Ryan, maybe you could probably answer that.
Yeah, I'm not. So what are the main? I'm not sure I've got a good answer for that.
I'm thinking maybe the cyber
I
criminal smuggling perspective.
Looks like Liz wants to jump
Go
on
for
it.
it, Liz.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for what I understand about the question is the type of attack or cyber crimes that we are facing in the port industry, and the one that I see and based on information that I have read, mostly is ransomware. Ransomware attacks are the one affecting the sector, and phishing as well. And there's one this technique that I think is very interesting that is very common in the critical infrastructure is the technique thinks of things, which is a technique that it is goes into mostly goes into the IT system, but the main goal is to transfer to the OT system, and it stays there for months or even years. And what they're doing is basically they are kind of recording and understanding all the process, um, how everything works. And when they decide to attack, their attack is very effective. I hope that was I answered the question.
I think
I
it's a
hope that
great.
was the answer.
I think it's great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth and
You're
Ryan,
welcome.
for taking a shot at that. So the next question that came in for the panel, anyone could take this. Could you give more detail about protective measures in ports against cyber interference?
I would say, start simple, understand what you're trying to protect. So getting that, grasping what you're trying to keep safe is the first step. And then once you've got that identified, start to implement any type of monitoring systems that you can, intrusion detection systems that are specific, whether it's an enterprise IT system or if it's an operational technology system. So selecting the right tools, if you will, or solutions to begin to have visibility into what you're trying to protect.
Another question came in. The question is, how can an individual supply chain participant, example, a port, assess and critique the cybersecurity preparedness of the adjacent participants, examples, BCOs, forwarders, teamship lines, truckers, railways, other ports, example, to whom they are cyber connected. And there's a French merci. So I guess this is coming in from French or maybe French Canada. So I think it's a great question. Anybody want to take a leap at that? Oh,
Get back to, Greg had mentioned, a lot of times it's just going to be part of kind of conditions of doing business with someone is showing us, hey, you've covered down, and these are the cyber systems and cybersecurity processes that your company has. I think that's probably the best way to get after some of that is, having some, processes laid out that, hey, if you're going to do business with us, this is the level of governance that we expect.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's a great input. Another thing that we do see is also putting cyber requirement specifications in your RFPs, your request for proposal or quotation for those third parties, is to bake in cyber requirements up front. And then that way you can have those third parties or those partners that you speak of, be able to come to the table with solutions or connectivity that meets your requirements. Okay, we're getting down to the very last question. So this one's a bit of a comment and a question. So when I was at the AAPA Seattle conference last July, ports complained that it was difficult to decide which cyber technology vendor was safe. I argued that vendors should be certified for their capabilities by some testing authority, much like medication, pharmaceutical needs to be qualified by the FDA. Does anybody have any input for that? I think it was more of a comment, but I think it's a
Yeah, I think it was a comment.
Yeah. Anybody want to?
I would loop it back to colleagues and cohorts, within your network.
I like that.
Ask everybody that may have had some opportunities to test solutions or that installed solutions and realized a year later, 2 years later, that they didn't work. So that for me, that would be the starting point.
I think that's great. Good stuff. Good replies. All right. We are vetting systems currently in place for third-party vendor suppliers, especially countries of threat example, cranes imported by China to all US ports. Where are third parties not included in contractual supply chain agreements at the port level considerations as a threat, and how are they identified? So I think this is a comment and question around how do we vet these systems? Anyone want to take it?
I can try to hit on that, and as folks saw, here in the U.S., the presidential executive order in February that went out, and then the Coast Guard published a maritime security directive for all PRC manufactured ship-to-shore cranes, that they went out and ensured that there was kind of and I would say it was a broad brush kind of buying down kind of the highest risk. But we still see now legislation moving its way through in DC to do a little bit more comprehensive examination of some of those cargo handling systems that certainly will then have, and again, proposed legislation have some time frame in order to govern whatever, if there are vulnerabilities found, you got this much time to be able to take care of it. So I'm sure that is going to continue to, work across the hill. And like I said, as long as we don't have a major cyber incident that pushes us into this prescriptive regulatory scheme that nobody wants and nobody benefits from, I think just a continual governance of cyber risk is really the best approach that we could hope for in the marine transportation system.
Well, I want to thank all the panelists today and also the CILT group for hosting this. We are at time. We did answer everyone's questions in the chat, so thank you, audience. Just in closing, we want to remind you that this recording will be available, and you should be able to get a download link, I would expect, within a week or so. And I'm thinking this will also be on the North American CILT's YouTube channel. So in closing, I want to say thanks to everyone, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, your evening, or your morning, wherever you may be. So thank you, and thank the panelists, and have a wonderful time.
Thank you all.
Thank you.